Hello and welcome to Nothing Ventured with me, Aarish Shah. Today, I am super excited to have with me in the studio Kristina Barger. Kristina is a cognitive and behavioral scientist with a career spanning clinical psychology, tech innovation, and entrepreneurship. With a foundation in applied psychology and decision-making from institutions like NYU and UCL, Kristina pivoted from therapy to technology in 2013, designing software solutions that drive behavioral change. Her pioneering work includes the first digital de-escalation training program for California law enforcement and a suite of state-approved products aimed at improving decision-making under high-stakes conditions. Currently, Kristina is consulting on an ethical AI initiative for mental health, focusing on voice-driven interfaces for remote symptom tracking and integration with US health insurance systems. For over 8 years, Kristina has supported founders, engineers, and PhDs from Entrepreneurs First, Y Combinator, and the broader tech and venture ecosystem, helping them navigate challenges like anxiety, burnout, and identity struggles. In today's episode, we talk about the fact that no two founders are built the same, how there are overachievers, perfectionism, and some mania amongst founders.
I see a lot of this type of person, right? An overachiever, super driven, super detail-oriented. And that's wonderful, but it veers over into perfection.
How confidence is often confused for competence.
I often see is that people correlate confidence with competence.
Yeah. How you should spend some time building up the rest of your life, not just your business.
You don't have a social life. You don't have hobbies. Maybe if you're married, you're lucky somebody's hanging on, putting up with you.
And how it isn't just tech that builds addictive products.
Tech is very much in the media, but I think if we're building addictive things, but that's marketing.
Taking an interdisciplinary approach to founder support and how to separate the emotion from the action.
It helps you learn to separate your own needs, your own drivers from other drivers.
And Kristina's contrarian opinion that society is on the cusp of coming out of a period of immaturity of discourse.
Society is perhaps on the cusp, coming out of this, of a period of an immaturity around this.
Let's get straight into it. This is Nothing Ventured with me, Aarish Shah, the podcast where I talk to the people behind the stories that make the venture capital ecosystem go round. I've been working with startups from pre-seed to Series C for the last decade, and companies that I've worked with have gone on to realize value and exit, or raise funds in excess of $500 million. I really hope you enjoy the episode, and if you have a guest that you'd love to see me have on, or you have a comment on any of the episodes that I've recorded so far, do reach out to me on LinkedIn or Twitter. I'd love to hear from you. Let's get straight into it. Kristina, great to have you in the studio with me. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me.
So we are going to be talking about quite a variety of topics, but really sort of centered around sort of founder mental health and behavioral science, right? So you work with founders from both Entrepreneurs First as well as Y Combinator. So what are the sort of mental health challenges that you find founders commonly face at different stages of the startup lifecycle, from sort of say pre-product market fit to post-IPO? And how would you recommend they maintain sort of wellness throughout those phases? In a recent pod I did with Fred Destin, he and I talked about some of the challenges that VCs face. So do you find that the issues you see that founders have are understood by investors, and do investors face different challenges? I know that's sort of 3 or 4 questions in one, but yeah. Essentially, what are those main challenges that founders face, and how does that translate across both the life cycle of the business, but also when they're dealing with investors?
Yeah, there are a lot of avenues I could go down there. There's one, I find it kind of foundational, so I'd like to mention it if that's
Please
okay.
do, yeah.
So it's individual differences among founders and
Of course.
personality.
Yeah.
I haven't seen reliable, broad sample research on this, but in my personal experience, I have seen highly conscientious, so veering over into anxiety, high levels of anxiety, perfectionism is what we're really talking about, and potentially hypomania, right? Because you have this very disordered sleep pattern, you need to work. And so these are the 2 things that are kind of, I think, very common, at least in the founders that I encounter. I don't want to say it's everyone because I haven't seen the research, but I see a lot of this type of person, right? An overachiever, super driven, super detail-oriented. And that's wonderful, but it veers over into perfectionism, which at times OCD, quite a few people that genuinely are a little bit OCD,
Mm.
diagnosed not by me even, and then also anxiety disorders. And then the mania side, I'm not talking necessarily full blown bipolar disorder, but yeah, you get into some of that, and if you don't have it, I think even if you don't have the predisposition towards the disorder already, sometimes the work style without good boundaries can kind of lead you down the same path. And in either case, those two types of people are overrepresented and a little bit more vulnerable. So they look really good on paper because they're hard workers, but that generally starts to burn them out at a.
Can I just stop you there for a second? Because I mean, I think this is highly pertinent. Right? At the moment on LinkedIn, there's one fund in particular, I won't mention the name, and one of the, I don't know if it's an analyst or a partner or principal or whatever he is. But anyway, he's put out the research that they've internally done based on their, on sort of the decks and the founders that they worked with. And their research seems to suggest that founders who are what's the word they use? I think it's sort of combative or something along those lines, but it's not even combative. It's you know, who are not easy to get on with.
Disagreeable.
I can't remember the word.
Literature.
Yeah. Are sort of the best founders. And I was sort of smirking, stroke smiling, stroke crying inside when you were talking about the sort of overachievement, perfectionism, and potential mania, because I've worked with founders of all of those types. Some of whom have been incredibly successful, others maybe a bit less so. But I guess the obvious question is, why do you think that is, right? And then the second question is there a bias potentially? So I guess what's the question I'm trying to ask? Is there a bias? Are these founders by nature like this, or does the business of venture and building a startup essentially force them down a pathway where they become, where these sort of traits become more highlighted or accentuated?
I pretty much take a systems approach with everything because I think that's pretty much how everything works. So I'm going to say all of the above. And I think they may even be selected for that because they come across as highly competent, and they are in fact highly confident and competent. So, these are also people who have achieved a lot before they've gotten there, right? This is one of the reasons people trust their venture capital with them, because they have a PhD, they've done something, right? Or they've had to apply a high level of good work ethic and a lot of attention to detail. So you've seen them succeed on this difficult path, so you think they'll succeed on this one, and that's also foundational to personality. So I think it's really all of the above. And I do want to say, I don't think that these people are bad founders. Absolutely not at all. Right? So I'm not saying like, oh, watch out for these people, they're vulnerable. They're fantastic. It's just for their own personal sake, sometimes they are, and that leads, but not always. So they can manage it.
So I mean, I want to talk about how they can maintain wellness, but I guess the next question that obviously comes, to my mind is there also a little bit of bias here? And not bias in the sense that you are biased towards or against these founders, but is there a bias in the sense that it's more likely that you will see these sort of founders because they are the sort of founders that will likely, as a result of getting to burnout or whatever it might be, seek out coaching or therapy or some sort of guidance?
I think it's entirely possible, but I think it's entirely possible because I think I'm kind of known as a coach that actually has mental health background, and the background in that I used to assess and treat all, like, the full spectrum of disorder, right? I don't anymore. I don't do anything medical. I want to stress that. But yeah, I probably do get a higher percentage of people who are a little bit more anxiety prone. That said, I still think that the tendency is going to be everywhere in the population because this characteristic it's very overrepresented in high achievers because that's how they achieve so much. It's a big part of their success, right? The discipline, motivation, the execution. They're just saying, I'm tired, but I'm going to do this anyway, right? And when you take that too far for too many years, that's when it's a problem or becomes a little problem. But I think it's going to be overrepresented in the founder population. The other thing is, it's compelling. It's compelling for a VC to look at this kind of person because, like, that guy's going to work hard. He's not just going to run off in the sunset with my money, right? Sorry, not guy, it's women too. Most of my group are guys, so sometimes I default to that. But it's very common among both men. I don't think perfectionism is. I don't think there's a gendered component to it.
Mm.
But yeah, I think
In
there's
fact,
somewhat,
if I were to apply a gendered component to it, I would probably think it's more indexed towards females
it may
being
be,
perfectionists rather than men.
yeah,
And I think a lot of men,
yeah.
certainly within the VC founder kind of community, often are a little bit fake it till they make it, rather than actually being that sort of overachiever kind of
Mm-hmm.
mentality.
Well, I think you have to fake it till you make it to some degree in startups. And just going back to what you said earlier about the kind of contrarian, disagreeable, like the kind of maverick personality style, I think that was maybe what you were getting at.
Yeah, the sort of Travis Kalanick kind of guy.
Yeah, but that's the disruptor, right?
Mm.
Like that's the person that has thought outside of the box and is brave enough to go outside of the box and to push those boundaries. So you do need that certain toughness or that enthusiasm or that drive or whatever it is that's going to push you to not just sign up for Deloitte and work your way to the top, right? So it is common. It is a type of person, but also I think because everything in startups, the vast majority of the time, it's innovative.
Mm.
And particularly the people that I work with, they're really on the cutting edge of innovation. So there's an incredible amount of uncertainty.
Mm.
And if they tell you all of that uncertainty, no one will invest, right? So, and so my guys, it's like they're all scientists, or the majority of them are scientists. So it's a real difficulty for them because they're used to being highly accurate and precise, but the business.
It's incredibly difficult to, yeah. I mean, look, and I work with and advise founders of that sort of ilk, and you know, when they ask me, okay, well, how much cash do we have? I'm like, kind of depends. What do you mean it depends? There's a number and there should be another number. I'm like, yeah, but that number can change depending on this variable, that variable, or whether you spend that or don't do this.
Yeah.
And I think it's I think about this actually quite a lot, you know, having built my own business, having failed in one of my businesses, and you know, what repercussions that had on myself financially, mentally, all the rest of it. The one thing I came back to actually was that I'm highly comfortable with actually a very uncomfortable level of risk. So my wife, who is not a founder type, I don't think she would describe herself as that, is very uncomfortable with the level of risk that I take, right? And I am by no means probably, you know, the riskiest of risk takers, right? But I think being comfortable with that level of risk in itself actually leads to questioning of whether you are, whether you should be comfortable. Like, I mean, you know, there are nights where I'm sort of sat there going, well, actually, hold on a second. I've been really comfortable with, you know, X, Y, Z, but actually should I maybe not be as comfortable, right? And I wonder whether, I don't know where I'm going with this, but it's sort of this question in my mind as to I wonder whether some of these founders that you work with, it is that inherent tension, to your point, around being highly accurate on the one side, having to become very uncomfortable with risk on the other side, but equally that discomfort with or that comfort with a level of risk is often the only way that you can actually build a successful business, right? Over the long term.
Yeah. I think you can become more comfortable with risk over time. You need to have kind of like corrective experiences. Maybe it's not corrective, it's positive in this sense, right? Where you take a small risk, it works. You take another, you know, tightly bounded risk.
You can build. Yeah.
And you can build your tolerance, your resilience. I hadn't even thought of this before, but if you think back to old school data on insurance, the men or car insurance, right? Men are generally considered more risk taking than women. There may be something there. I don't know if that translates, if that's still current research, but I bet it is, and I bet it applies as well in the environment somehow.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised at all. I mean, I think a lot of the heuristics that we work with are heuristics that are essentially a result of 20 years of biases, or 30 years or 50 years even of biases. I mean, like even the fact that so few venture dollars flow to women, when actually statistically the data shows that women have an outside, you know, build more sustainable businesses and create larger outcomes when they do build those businesses, right? And yet still only 2% of capital goes to them.
Yeah, I think that actually, I mean, so that may underscore the risk argument entirely, right? I mean, if the business is less risk, then in theory, the business is more sustainable because you didn't skip a lot of steps. Maybe, and you built it on a, you know, a stronger foundation. You didn't skip too many. Yeah, I don't know. I think one of the things that I think, or that I often see, is that people correlate confidence with competence.
Yeah.
And I wonder if some of that is what comes into play. I'm going to say something personal here. Maybe it sounds crazy, but a few years ago, I realized, and I was working actually inside of quite a large company, all men, absolutely all men. And some of them quite powerful, like quite a few double PhDs, like hospital level directors. And it was just, it was very difficult. And I realized, because I'm not doing that kind of bravado thing, I don't even know how to describe it, but I thought, okay, this is to be a man. So I had a 23-year-old. He was the best coach of all. He said, that guy doesn't know what he wants. Just tell him what he wants. I thought, okay, I'm going to try.
I mean,
and it worked.
That confidence
thought,
that confidence and competence thing. I mean, like, it's across the board, right? I mean, we're probably digressing quite a lot from the core topic here, but like, it's what we're seeing in your home country, the US, where this assumption that, okay, if you are a relatively brash 30, 40, 50-year-old man who has built something, that means that you can turn your hand to anything, which, I mean, I have a massive problem with that assumption, and I think it's wholly incorrect. But we often see it time and time again. And actually, like, I've worked with obviously both male as well as female founders. And what I tend to find is it's a lot easier to work with female founders because they are cognizant of what they don't know. Whereas a lot of the male founders I've worked with, not all of them, and, obviously there is a spectrum. A lot of them will confidently assert X, Y, Z without any real understanding of it. I'm the domain expert essentially in the business in terms of finance, but I would find myself being challenged on something where I'd kind of have to sit there and go, hold on a second, what are you talking about? You don't know what you're talking about. Whereas my experience working with predominantly with female founders has been that they are much more open to trying to understand what the numbers may be telling that they weren't expecting, rather than sort of just saying, well, no, those numbers are wrong. They must be because I believe this, versus why. But I just wanted to get back to that core question. So, you're working with these founders, a lot of them are overachievers, perfectionists, maybe some bordering on manic.
A few of them are.
Okay.
I don't. Manic is a strong word.
Yeah, it's like
a strong word.
It has significant connotations, right? But more importantly, so I guess there's two questions I have there, right? So are these founders coming to you at the point where they have reached burnout, or well before, or well after? And I guess how can you help them maintain a level of wellness and well-being in their mental health sort of throughout that journey?
I think they're coming at all different points. One common point is friction, a conflict between founders or employees. That's a very interesting. And I mean, I could talk about that for ages. It's its own type of thing. Very complicated, actually. But in terms of the burnout, some people are coming in because they use it as optimization. Because I have also a degree in cognitive science and decision making, right? And so the first degree was positive psychology and wellness. So I did treat all of these sort of clinically very ill people, but the emphasis was on positive psychology. And then the second one was on cognition, right? Optimizing the way we can control our own brains to produce better outcomes. So some people come for that, for optimization, like peak performance. So there isn't necessarily a burnout issue. Yeah. It's like, I have this goal, I want to reach it. Yeah. So those people would have like a little bit more free time on their hands. They might not be pre-PMF, they don't have those issues. But it's a different package with all of them of interventions that we try, or ways that I speak to people. But yeah, if you want to get back to the overachievers, because I'd say that's the bulk of people, because also that's who's going to seek out more help, right? Because they want to get even better. They want to milk out that last 0.05% of their day. So funny. Some of them probably listen to this. I think a lot of it is convincing them to listen to themselves and their body a little bit more, and just accepting the fact that you're not Superman. No one is Superman. It's okay. Your company will not crash. And you just kind of have to tell them that's general message just over and over and over until it becomes more. Yeah, okay. I can relax a little. not going to end. I will still be an absolutely incredible performer,
Mm.
but I can take a nap, right? Like, usually you get them to see it when they start to realize that the making or the kind of higher order cognitive is going down. Usually that's all.
And how okay, so interesting.
Yeah.
How do you recognize that?
They have to recognize it in their day to day, but we can talk about the issues that are going on in the company, and then you can say, well, that was something you would have had to take back and look at. I think you have the energy to do that. How often have you been doing that? No, or they see
Right.
that they're making mistakes, because also it's
Or they're taking longer to come to a decision or whatever.
yeah,
right?
also, or I mean, I also take kind of a cognitive behavioral therapy approach, but a modified approach. So I'm trying to teach people as well that
Yeah.
you should pay attention to your, I don't know, your body, your mind,
Your
and
whole body
yeah,
health, right?
yeah. So I almost take like more of an arousal model. So like pay attention from a physiological perspective to tension, to increased heart rate, to shallow breathing, all these types of things indicate a higher level of arousal. And generally, I mean like stressful arousal, right? I mean, if it's good, that kind of arousal, great, do it where you want. But we're talking about whatever it is. Is it anger? Is it fear? Is it worry? I don't care. It's going up and you don't want it to go up, because the
Yeah.
more it goes up, the more you get and the more distracted you get and the more
Mm.
mistakes you make, right? So you monitor it that way. You can also monitor it in the way you interact with people. You have more misunderstandings, you have more friction, you have more conflict, but you stutter more, you make more mistakes, you make more typing errors. You like, what's going on in your mind? What's the metacognitive experience there? Are you more negative? Are there more shoulds? Are there more worries? So there's a range of ways, and different people are more in tune with their body. Different people are more in tune with external feedback, like, from people complaining a lot more. But we kind of figure out which cues are the most salient for you, and then watching to adapt so that those cues, like, you can see them when they're at a smaller level, right? That they're not smacking you in the face. You get that level of arousal down, and you keep the baseline lower.
I mean, there's so much. So the first thing was like, I mean, I think your point around, the founder habit of being so emotionally, cognitively, physically, mentally tied up in their business
Also,
is
Yeah.
is like really self-destructive, because
Yeah.
so I mean, I've written this 100 times. I think it's a chapter in my book. Not yet finished, guys. But yeah, maybe I need to come see you about some overachieving and perfectionism. But anyway, and procrastination possibly. But no, so there is a chapter which I've called "You Are Not Your Business."
Absolutely.
And it's one of these things I learned when it wasn't my business, but I took the business and the decisions and the issues so much to heart that I was really struggling to sleep, anxious, probably self-medicating in ways that I
Yeah.
shouldn't have necessarily
course.
been doing. And I think a lot of founders probably have that additional glass of wine or second beer or third beer or whatever it is when they shouldn't necessarily. But that whole sort of thought process of, well, hold on a second, if the business fails, I'll be okay.
It's business.
If
not
someone
you.
else runs a business, I'll be okay, right? Because it is a business.
Mhm.
And I mean, like, interestingly, I mean, I think about this slightly bizarrely. Under law, a corporation is a separate legal
Yeah.
person. It is actually a legal person
Yeah.
by law. And so actually thinking about it in that way helps a little bit, because you can segregate yourself from your personality from that. And I wonder whether for a lot of exited founders, this is why they often then go on to build something else. Or a lot of the time I see, they're sitting on 10, 20, 30, 40 million dollars or whatever the number might be. And yet they don't really seem particularly satisfied. And I think it's because they've been extricated from this thing that took up their whole personality. And I think that can be really unhealthy. And then the second thing that came out of all of this is I think for a lot of founders, they struggle with that self-reflection to be able to pick up on their own cues, as you said.
Yeah.
I know personally, I mean, it probably took me, or it has taken me, whatever, 20 years to figure out what those cues are. I have now understood when those anxiety levels are going up, whether it's, and that might be anger or frustration with a child, or it might be something else altogether. But the only way I've been able to kind of manage all of those is I've set myself up, and again, I think I've talked about this on the podcast before, but set myself up with physical and mental routines to help me manage that, right? And the biggest, and here's the thing, and I'd love to see whether this is one of the issues that you, I'm sure it is actually from anything you just said, but the biggest struggle I have internally with myself is, have I done enough for my business today? Right? It's sort of that Elon Musk, what did you do last week? Right? But like, have I put in enough effort? Am I doing enough? Could I be doing more? Should I be doing more? I should be doing more. Like, and that's a constant kind of thread. Again, without turning this into my own personal therapy session.
It's very relevant.
But I wonder whether that's sort of one of the things that comes up quite a lot.
Absolutely. And the perniciousness of that statement, enough, because it is unquantifiable.
Yeah, exactly.
So you can never reach it.
Yeah.
It's
like
so
happiness.
emotionally driven and subjective. You can reach it some days when you feel, okay, this is enough, maybe. But I encourage everybody to plan and commit to what they're going to get through the week, and then let the rest of it go. And one of the other things you're saying, where you get so involved in business, it becomes your baby. Look at it. Part of that is because you build up the other pillars in your life. I mean, not you personally, I'm speaking
yeah,
to
sure,
right?
Yeah.
The common thing is that all of the energy, all of the attention goes into the business, or let's say a massive percentage. And then there isn't, you don't have a social life. You don't have hobbies. Maybe if you're married, you're lucky somebody's hanging on, putting up with you.
But there are enough stories of founders that exit having divorce, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It puts a lot of strain on other things. So you need to spend some time building up the rest of your life, because otherwise there isn't anything there. And if the business should fail, if you should exit the business, then there's nothing. And then what happens?
Yeah.
It's a very, very difficult position to be in, and it's unnecessary. So people think, oh, I'm wasting this hour, date or whatever. But you have to take a more holistic view and think, yes, I am not spending this hour on the business, but I'm investing in myself. And as every human has a certain amount of time, attention that they can focus on one thing, and you need things that nourish you, unfortunately. I mean, it would be great if we were all just machines. We could just build our business, and
that would be an awful existence.
It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't. Yeah.
I mean, not only does it not work that way, but I think we also trick ourselves into this belief that your to-do list is somehow is it somehow an indication of your worth or your execution ability. But it's really easy to knock out 7 to 10 low-level tasks and feel really great. I did that.
Yeah.
But that really big frog, have you swallowed the frog? Have you boiled the frog? Whichever, swallowed or boiled the frog, I can never remember. But have you tackled that really big thing that's going to move the needle in the business, or have you just let that slide? I think that's a lot harder for founders. And maybe just to round off this question, do you think that? I mean, does one of the questions come up? I'd be interested to understand. Do you find with the founders you work with that they struggle, or that they find that investors don't understand the struggles they're going through?
I don't think people talk about it with investors.
Interesting.
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, you may have the odd relationship there where you feel comfortable, but for the most part, I mean, they think it's perceived as a risk to the business.
Exactly.
So nobody's going to share that. And a lot of founders also think I have to sort of like lie to all the employees as well, or put on a brave face for the employees. And there is some of that, right? You need to have some leadership, and you're responsible for keeping the ship afloat. You don't want to, everybody in despair. But I think sometimes people put too much pressure on themselves there. I think sometimes showing some vulnerability
I think
encourages your team to show vulnerability and tell you what they were hiding from you, so you can see your mistakes. You know what I mean?
And I think it's good leadership, right? I mean, ultimately, vulnerability allows people a safe space to be able to express what's going on. And I know there's a lot of like, okay, that feels a bit woke and a bit like kind of, lovey-dovey or whatever. But actually, like every time I've been in a business in a leadership role, like actually honesty and vulnerability are the reasons that I've remained in a leadership role
Yeah.
rather than the reasons I haven't, right? And I think I actually, I mean, like, I absolutely agree. Founders, and I understand why they feel like they can't be or shouldn't be. And let's not forget, many founders, not all of them, but a lot of them can be quite immature. And I don't mean that in a negative way. They just are young, have not had life experience, and have not necessarily had leadership or leadership roles themselves, or leaders that or maybe have had leaders that they emulate who are not necessarily the best of leaders, right? So this all becomes like a massive learning curve for them. I mean, I think it's fascinating. I think, again, to your point, we could probably talk about it for a long time. But I want to switch, because to your earlier point, you're also a behavioral scientist.
Yeah.
So I'd love to understand how behavioral science has evolved in tech, especially in terms of kind of the ethical considerations, because I always think about Nir Eyal's kind of classic Hooked, which really describes how so many of the social media platforms we have, so many of the startups that we've had over the last sort of 10, 20 years, engineered engagement to make them essentially more addictive, right? They were essentially just spiking dopamine and tapping into the dopamine system. And given that engagement and the ability to ensure users come back to your product is so critical when you're building a startup, is there another way that you can balance that out? That whole need to bring users back without actually hijacking that whole dopamine system. Like, is there a happy place where you can use an app but not necessarily just be completely enthralled with it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there is. It depends on what you're designing the app for and what you're comfortable with around the margins, right? Because of course, if you hook people into the app, then ostensibly margins, right? At least your metrics, your usage, engagement metrics are higher. So I think it's kind of a personal ethical decision company or board has to make. And absolutely, we can build things like that, right? It just depends on size and where you're willing to draw the line. But I want to say also, like, two things. Behavioral science is essentially, it's like
Sure.
it's like UX. Like that's just studying and measuring
design.
people's behavior.
Sure.
Yeah, but anyway, behavioral science is the behavior of people, the science of behavior, and psychology is the behavior. But it's not just tech that does this. All right, tech is very much in the media, but I think for building addictive things. But that's marketing. In a way. That's marketing
true.
and branding. It's the whole point of it. It's in everything. And we're in an advanced industrial society. People are very, very educated. There's expertise across many, many disciplines that are working together to get you to buy stuff. And it's everything. It's absolutely everything. So yeah, I mean, tech is maybe a little bit better at it, or much better at it than some of the other industries, but I don't think.
Yeah. So
None of it's great. I'm not saying it's all.
I mean, just as you were saying that, I was just going, oh, shit, that's like everything that I eat, drink, buy. Like, yeah, actually, you're 100% right. I mean, like, frankly, even sitting here doing this podcast, like, there is a reason that we have the screens and that we release shorts and reels and so on, right? It's so that you can bring people back and so that they're engaged and hopefully come back and want to, listen more, read more, whatever. Sadly, unlike most startups, or unlike some startups, I'm not sure that the podcast is ever going to make me that sort of amount of money, or any money at all for that matter. But you're right. I mean, at the end of the day, and I think about this, when I think about, my kids, and, whether it's the junk food, or whether it's, the app on their phone, or whether it's, the bright lights enticing them to buy, a new jacket or whatever. Yeah. Like, everything is about how do you get people to buy more. That's somewhat of a depressing thought, actually. No, it's fine, but I mean, it's
That's
obviously
how our world works. It's how the economy moves around.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, it's also obvious, but equally, I mean, I guess. Yeah. So the flip side of that, though, and this is something I have thought about, or do think about, or do question. Right, there have been a lot of tech businesses that have been attempted to be built rather, that try and use that addictive quality to more positive effect, right? So I think about the Whoop and sort of healthness and fitness trackers for sure. But then there's also this sort of class of technology that has tried to build I always describe it as tech that tries to solve the problems that tech created, right?
Yes,
So like,
exactly what.
so
Yeah.
the mental health app that supports people that have been bullied because of social media, right? And I've seen
Mm-hmm.
or
Mm-hmm.
or social media for people that were bullied online. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
hold on, this is like super counterintuitive and like a little bit
Yeah.
contradictory. I mean, like, so how do you think about that? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
where can we be more positive with the nudges that we're giving people? I guess is a question.
I think a lot of people who are building a lot of companies, they just don't have this background, right?
Mm,
They are not behaviorists, they're not psychologists. It doesn't come naturally to them necessarily to think that way. I mean, maybe if you're in some sort of health science, fitness,
sure.
medicine, then it would. But I think if we're taking a historical perspective on the tech industry, right? It was engineers in the beginning. It was
Mm,
just engineers. There were no designers. There were no, like, all of this, extra, all of us extra people. We didn't exist. And it's only been the last 5 or 10 years that medical people are starting to get into
yeah.
the tech world, right? So now more and more, there's more and more interdisciplinarity, and the more scientists and people with a different perspective can come in and say, okay, look, let's start building new things. So I think the biggest driver behind that is going to be including scientists
Mm,
or people, I mean, or maybe I don't know, people of faith, or I don't know, but people from outside the tech and business world
yeah.
who
Possibly
want to
bringing that
build.
ethical
Yeah,
consideration,
yeah,
possibly. Yeah.
yeah.
I think that's really interesting. I mean, like, for sure. So I guess the premise there is engineers built the. So I had someone on the podcast who I think I've probably said this story before, but she said, for example, she was at an event and the speaker got on stage, pulled her phone out of her bag, and said, "Well, if there was no woman on the design team for the iPhone, because if there had been, it wouldn't have been designed black because it's impossible to find your phone in a black phone in a handbag, something like that, right?" Um, I don't know, but that was
Okay.
that was kind of the story, right? But the point, and the more important point, is bringing those different perspectives allows for a broader understanding of what what an acceptable product might look like, and how it might impact people positively and negatively, right? And then it is a decision as to whether you include or
Yeah.
not include. And that equally, it is not about defining that doing it this way is right, doing it that way is wrong. It's just that the more information you have, hopefully the better decisions you can make. And you may well choose, like, I mean, if you're running a gambling business, kind of want it to be a little bit addictive, right?
Of
So
course.
therefore,
Of course.
yes, you might bring in someone, um, who might help with the advertising, so that it's, gamble responsibly or whatever. But your product itself might still be of the nature that you want it to be, right? Um, I I I I kind of feel like, and yes, I appreciate psychology, behavioral science as sort of two sides of the same coin almost, but you know, we're seeing behavioral science touching our lives much more. So if I think about even the government, right, has like a nudge department
Absolutely.
at the
Yeah.
HMRC to, "Hey, have you paid your bill
Yeah.
yet?" And
Yeah.
the letters, you can see the tone of the letters kind of changing over time. Sadly, I've had lots of those letters.
I haven't gotten those yet.
Yeah, I have. But they're kind of the nudge unit.
Yeah.
That you can see that change in language and quote unquote aggression kind of coming
Mhm.
through. And I mean, I
It's
think about it.
effective.
It is quite,
Yeah.
you do want to take action based on what they say. Um, so it does feel like this whole, whether it's psychology of product or business or the behavioral
Mhm.
science behind it, it feels like, especially as we now build more tools on AI, this will become more and more important, because understanding how people react, respond to these tools
Mhm.
is just instrumental in understanding both how to build them well and functionally um, useful, uh, but also how to build them ethically, right? And
Yeah.
without that, then if you don't have that balance, I think that's where you get into scarier.
Yeah. 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 Although there's so much I could say on that. I mean, I will say, because again, we haven't had so much interdisciplinarity in the past. I think there's a lot more collaboration across the sciences, across technology, across all disciplines in academia than there were 20 years ago, for example. That's going to naturally improve, I think. I think how we design, and I think we're also going to see more behavioral science everywhere because of the collaboration, because we realize no matter what we are doing, the people are there.
Yeah.
And it's all about getting people to behave the way we want them to behave. Do I want you to buy more of my tennis shoes and t-shirts, or do I want you to pay your bill to HMRC or whatever it is? It's all decision making and behavior.
Yeah. By
right?
people.
Yes. So if we define behavioral science as, something related to decision making or influencing the choices of others, because broadly speaking, psychology has all of these different umbrellas under it, right? Clinical and cognitive and educational. But in this sense, if it's influencing people's behavior, then of course we're going to see it across all areas of life.
Yeah.
And it's only going to improve business models. And then if you get people who are properly trained there, then you'll also have ethics involved.
Yeah.
But I don't actually know what's coming out of like current behavioral science training programs. I would assume that there's ethics involved.
I would hope there would.
I mean, if you're doing anything in healthcare, then there's the ethics component is huge, like huge. If I compare my training as a therapist to my coaches, it's we had 6 hours a week, of 6 people in a room doing therapy on each other, videoed, and then you watch the videos together and you critique absolutely everything. Why did you make that gesture? Why did you do this? What were you hoping to get from the client? Do you think your own personality was getting in the way? So you get years of that. So
I could not go through that.
It's brutal.
Yeah.
But
My
it's
ego would not
important.
survive.
It's important. It helps you. It helps you learn to separate your own needs, your own drivers from other drivers. And I think that is something that we're not really taught. I think Fred Destin kind of talked about that a little bit. I listened.
He did. I mean,
podcast.
he's on a journey, so he definitely. Yeah. I think he's been thinking about a lot of this stuff and how do you take your out of the room? How do you?
Yeah.
I think especially when he was talking about kind of how do you be a good board member. This is exactly what he's saying is how do you not inject yourself into the decision just to have something to say rather than actually having something to say, and like when can you bring value to what's being discussed as opposed to just and look, I mean I think we have this problem where everyone is searching for recognition and for something to say, essentially, right? Like we all know that most people don't listen. They are just, I say most people, a lot of people don't listen. They're just waiting to figure out what they can say. Seconds, several minutes. But yeah, I mean, I think to your point, as more people come into the system, more perspectives are brought in, you will see change. And I think, we'll see where that change takes us. But I think this whole sort of topic of interdisciplinary sort of approach really leads nicely to kind of our last question, which is when you think about that in terms of founder support and given your experience across so many domains, how do you think you can combine clinical psychology, cognitive science, and entrepreneurship to create effective support mechanisms for tech founders? And more importantly, what unique benefits does that approach offer? Because that feels like I think if you added in physical fitness, you'd probably have, full spectrum, whole body kind of holistic care. But yeah, with so many sort of approaches, does that essentially allow you to be a better advocate for the founder's own health than essentially just going to see a therapist, coach, or a life coach?
I think so. I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so. Let's say. I mean, first of all, I would say I prefer therapists in general. If you're going to a business coach or something where it's specific skills, then that's a different case. But just to kind of coach, I mean, a therapist can help you with a lot of the problems that you have, because a lot of the founders that they have are, around uncertainty, confidence or mediation or separating themselves and their own needs from the decisions of the business. That's a big thing. I think that's some of what gets back to that with Dustin. But that plug aside, for me, having the background training in psychology, we're trained as scientists and practitioners. So if you go, there's different ways, but if you're on a PhD kind of level, you learn both the how to conduct research, which is excellent because that helps you learn to distinguish bias. It helps you ask questions, and it helps you understand how to understand literature too, right? Like I can access and understand literature very, very easily. But it also trains you in how to be a clinician. And part of the training of being a clinician is learning how to separate between emotion and what needs to happen. And I find that that's a big, big commonality, in every sort of session, many, many sessions. Okay, this is what you want. You're very upset. Are you doing this for yourself or are you doing this for the business, right? And then also because I've been in entrepreneurship, that whole realm across the whole cycle for so many years, I know what issues they're dealing with often, right? And I know a lot of VCs personally too. So I'm kind of across the board. I can understand a lot of the perspectives and a lot of the issues that are coming up. And accelerator, I know, So I think it gives some sort of comfort and familiarity. Oh, I should say one more thing about the clinical. A lot of startups, they don't have structure and organization, right? And so it's almost like this messy family thing because people's identities are caught up in their work in a way that they aren't in corporate. And they have these, they're not sleeping and they're stressed out. So the normal barriers that you would have in the way you communicate with other people are lower. There's more shouting, there's more tears, it becomes more complicated and almost becomes like a family system.
Yeah.
So it can be incredibly complicated to disentangle all of that. And then I think the cognition, so the behavioral science, I would call it more like what I'm doing is more cognitive science. It is behavioral science, but cognition underpins behavior. You make the decision before you do, whether you actively make the decision or you passively make the decision. So for me, it's more of a first principles
system one
kind of
versus
approach.
system two.
Absolutely. Well, those are both decisions though, right? Yeah. So I look at things from a cognitive optimization because everybody wants to perform better. Everybody that's coming to goals, they want to better themselves, and I think a normal therapist knows very well how to help you yourself, but has less idea from a commercial perspective.
I think so. It's interesting because I did therapy for a couple of years, and I found it helped me enormously in all aspects of my life. Not that necessarily I was specific assistant business, but it helped because if you can resolve certain questions in this side of your life, and look, I wrote about this recently, and I was being a little bit tongue in cheek. I always am, but I wrote that I haven't achieved work-life balance. Actually, what I have is work-life synchronicity, right? And the way I think about it is, why should these two things be in conflict with each other? My work and my life are the same thing. Work is part of my life. It's there is no tension there, or or there are ways I can relieve that tension, right? And I'm able to do that from a privileged position because it is my own business. I can make decisions, and if I don't want to work today, hey, might not work, but I can take the day off, or I can take my wife to an appointment in the afternoon if she needs my help or whatever, right? But I think a lot of, and I wonder whether, it's interesting actually. Sorry, this question just came across.
Sure.
It came to mind. Like, do a lot of founders you work with see, clearly not if they're using it, but do they see therapy or the sort of service that you provide as almost a sign of vulnerability, of weakness, or do some of them come in kind of pushed by someone else, or are they doing it of their own volition? Like, how does it?
Both.
Okay.
It's both. It's all of the above. I get all kinds of things from I want to be the world's youngest billionaire to my wife hates me.
Interesting.
As the first line in the email, just all kinds of things.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
It's fine. You can write to me anything you want. I can handle it. See it all. Don't worry. Yeah. All of it. It's across the board.
So I remember one of the things that when I was doing therapy was realizing that my therapist had a therapist or not that my therapist or but he has an advocate. I can't remember what the
supervisor.
Supervisor.
Absolutely.
Right. to check in
Yes.
that they aren't internalizing some of the pain, which clearly they are going to see, right, on a regular basis. Does that work the same for you? Are you?
Yes, I have supervision, but that's not exactly why I use it. I use it as a sounding board to make sure that I'm staying on to make sure that if I see somebody and I think, okay, this is going a little bit too far, maybe there's diagnosis here, maybe referral to a psychiatrist, they're not really taking it on board. That would be one time that I would absolutely go to supervision, but I have it also regularly set up. Yes, psychiatrist and psychologist. And I just want to say that I always refer. I have a very strong referral network here in the UK, in New York, and in California, and I do not charge for referrals. I think it's incredibly unethical. I will not do it. So I will always do that, and I'm clearly making a plug that I don't like it when people do that. It's absolutely not in the interest of your client, right? You're conflicting.
Yeah, so you're working for the best outcome for them. I guess actually this leads to I didn't actually have this as a question for you, but I think I'm going to ask it because I think it's actually, this is the last episode, I think, of Nothing Ventured to go out this year. And it'll be going out just around Christmas, if not actually the week of maybe Boxing Day. I need to double check. But this is a really tense period of the year.
It is.
We've just gone through essentially 12 months of, I would say, one of the most challenging years in recent history, from a number of perspectives. I am sure that a lot of founders will have struggled this year, whether that's fundraising, whether that's closing deals. People have not been making decisions, uncertainty over elections in the UK, in the US. Yes, we've had resolution in both of those instances, but, you might not be entirely happy with which way one or the other may have gone. And, it is hard out there. It's tough. And December tends to be, again, to your point about the overachieving and perfectionism and equally around, what have you got done? December is not a great time because everything switches off. And as a founder, that can be incredibly lonely because, okay, lots of people are off. Lots of people have taken holiday because, funny enough, they want to spend some time with their family. And you're now sitting there going, well, but what about the business? What about the business, right? And that can be a really incredibly tough place to be in because, you think that everyone should be pouring energy, the same energy that you are into building your business. And of course, in a very early stage business, that may well be the case, right? But I think that December can be a really tough time. It can be a very lonely time. What, if any, advice would you give to a founder in December 2024? Like, what should they maybe be thinking about doing to kind of give themselves the best opportunities to attack 2025 well?
I think I would underline that it has been a difficult year, and we've seen that across the board, particularly funding, financial issues. You cannot internalize that. It's not your fault. So many of these things are outside of your control. No matter how good of a job you do, you cannot control everything. So people that are used to winning and being really successful, very, very hard concept to grasp that some things will happen to you that you cannot control. And that also goes for younger people, right? The older you get, the more life gives you a few knocks, and then you realize. But younger people have still managed to succeed at everything so far, particularly successful backed founders. Very difficult for them to accept that it's okay. The world is not going to end. It's not my fault. And the other thing, time off, the world will not end. That there's very little work gets done sort of across the world in this period. So it's a gift to you to invest in yourself. And you've really just got to make it easy. Everything's not on your fault. You're not going to fail from these small little things. Zoom out. I think that zooming out. So.
Yeah, I mean, at a personal level, so thank you. I mean, I think a lot of founders probably need to hear that. And I think it is an incredible opportunity to do that. In fact, what I decided to do, I'll be in a month. And normally I would try and pack in a few calls, but I've actively said, no, I'll park these till the new year. Because I also know no one's going to make a decision, right? Like in the next couple of weeks. I mean, it's just not going to happen. And what I want to do is focus. Yes, I do want to focus on the business, but on really big picture stuff, where it's me, a notebook, and
Mhm.
just some thoughts, right? So not actively doing stuff, but actually actively thinking about stuff, and then a little bit on the side. But the point is, I've purposely taken 2-3 weeks. We'll be spending that with my wife's family. Uh, but this is probably the first time I will be doing that and not really opening up the laptop.
Good.
Which is a real challenge for me.
You'll survive.
I will survive. I
So will
know.
your business.
Yeah, I'm
You
just gonna,
will,
I'm
I
just gonna,
promise.
I'm just gonna find some fun things to do. No, but I think this is the point, and
You
I
will.
I think
Yeah.
throughout life, I've always been one of these people that okay, we've gone on holiday to XYZ place, but I mean, there's part of me that like there's no way I could get through any period of time without checking emails at least once a day, right? Like, and I think I would be very anxious if I came back from a break and didn't have that sort of set up, but not obsessively, I guess is the point there. And I trying not to
You're on your
unravel,
journey.
yeah,
You're
but
on your
trying not to
journey.
unravel your good work so far, right? But no, look, I think it is massively important that people do take this time and take that time to reflect and have the break and concentrate on themselves. Maybe think about some of the things that haven't been working and that have been working, right? Because I think it's also
Mhm.
it's also a period to reflect positively on the things that have gone well
Absolutely.
as much as anything else, right? So yeah, anyway, I could not agree more is my point. I have one final question, and you and I have, we had a bit of a chat about this earlier, so I'm now incredibly intrigued. So what is one thing that you have a contrarian conviction about from any area of life, whether that's work, politics, socially, or at home? What is that hill that you would die and defend?
So I typically have a lot of contrarian positions, not intentionally, but just a
Happens to be, yeah.
healthy dose of skepticism. I'm going to say that I think society is perhaps on the cusp, coming out of this, of a period of an immaturity around discourse in a certain way. And I think that talk about how it shows up, but I think where it comes from is media, social media, the rapid change in tech and social media content creation. So the big peak in sort of, or like when social media content really started to be like churned out was millennials, right?
Yep.
And millennials are reaching their late 30s and early 40s now, but they were not that age when they started it, right? Like you were.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Right.
I'm Gen X millennial. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right. But think about it. How much of the discourse, how much of the of all of the media in the world, the conversation, this global conversation, at least in the West, because let's say we'll keep it to English because that's what I can
Sure.
comment on. But how much of that is actually driven by people whose average age is 25?
Probably not a lot.
You don't think so?
The actual conversation.
No, there's the social media content.
Oh yeah, no.
And then that influences over time.
that's
That
a lot.
influences what goes into traditional media as well. Not the
Yeah.
first year or the second year or the third year, but a lot of the ideas that are kind of nothing we've discussed in our conversation here. It's been highly professional and work oriented. But these kind of social discourse
Yeah.
ideas, I think, are driven by a very young segment of the population, and I think it gives them a higher level of emotionality and a higher level of polarity and extremism.
And you think we're coming out of that?
I hope that we're coming out of it.
Because they are growing out of it?
Yeah, because content is now created by people across the spectrum. So if you go before,
I
so
get
I'm
it now.
taking a
Yeah, yeah,
developmental approach. If you look at before social media, because social media allowed everybody to have a platform, right?
Yeah.
But older people didn't have time to deal with this, so it was the students that were doing it, right? And students have always had a voice, but that voice has been tempered.
And amplified.
Well, now it's been amplified, but in
Yeah.
the past it was tempered by, institutions or whatever, right? And that would have to go through multiple levels of process. Is this accurate? Is this safe to release? And all these levels of maturity and boring things. And so the actual topics that went out and the things that people were excited about or discussing were filtered through the lens of an older segment of the population.
Yeah. So my question then to you is
that too abstract?
No, not at all. Not. I mean, look. I mean, well, I would hope that you are correct. I don't know that you are, but so is your contrarian opinion that we have been in a period of immaturity or that we are coming out of it? Which is the contrarian? Or
Oh,
both?
but I mean both, because it's a cycle,
Yes,
right? So I'm hoping that we're kind of coming out of it, and I'm hoping that the emotionality and the extremes will come down a little.
So
I'm hoping, maybe.
yeah, so I would say that I would love that for that to be the case. My concern is that we're actually in that territory, and I think partly the reason
We
that
may be entrenched.
we might,
Yeah.
yeah, and I think and I think that entrenchment is maybe coming through um, the polarization of the echo chambers that are
Yeah.
out there, and the fact that the obvious example at the moment is this flight of sort of left-leaning or politically left-leaning people away from Twitter onto Blue
Yep.
Sky, which I think is a
Yeah.
really, really, really stupid thing. Because actually, then great, you're going to talk to a bunch of people that think the
Yeah.
same here, and a bunch of people that think the same here, and that's and actually, maybe that's maybe that brings the overall heat down, the temperature down. But actually, to your point around discourse, it absolutely stifles discourse, right?
Absolutely.
And I would agree. I mean, I definitely so I've written again several times that what we have a problem with at the moment is this lack of nuance in any debate, because there is no discourse, because it isn't a debate, because it is one line which has been posted to create maximum,
Yep.
the maximum
Emotional
amount of
arousal.
emotional arousal,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And and then any attempt to debate that just gets dragged into the gutter, which is why podcasts are so much more fun, because you can actually have a conversation, right?
Yeah.
But equally, I mean, like,
Yeah.
I would have to challenge myself and ask, well, okay, have I had someone on the podcast that I fundamentally disagree with? And maybe I haven't, or I haven't.
Yeah.
So I wonder. I mean, I look, maybe that's a lovely sentiment to come into 2025 with. I
I'm
hope we're there. But
I think more and more people are aware of it, though. You're starting to see more and more people aware of algorithms affect behavior and how social media is incredibly toxic on many, many levels. So I'm hoping that sea change, along with the fact that more and more people who are using social media are more mature, right? Because if before the world was essentially run by 20-year-olds, then think of yourself when you're 20 years old. You must have had an incredibly different perspective, right? They're far more emotional, like peaks and troughs. So I'm hoping developmental approaches combined with more regulation, because there's going to have to be regulation. Right?
I also wonder whether
will help.
Yeah, I mean, regulation could help. Europe, I mean, it's probably less chance of that happening over the next few years, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
But actually, it's interesting, because I wonder whether the fact that, so I think about my wife's nieces and nephews, who are all very much digitally native, very much born into digital. So my eldest daughter is 23. She was born in 2001. iPhone didn't come out for another 6 years. My second daughter was born in 2007 when the iPhone came out. She's definitely digitally native. However, my wife's nieces and nephews were born after that. So they were, the iPhone and the technology was already prolific. And I wonder whether, whilst they're entrenched and they understand how it works, they seem to be less engaged in the social media aspect of it. Like, so they're engaged in between themselves. So Snapchat, WhatsApp, whatever, between themselves, between their
channels.
Yeah, exactly, comms channels. But they're not. My daughters are not posting on Twitter
TikTok.
or TikTok or LinkedIn. So I wonder whether they've been bombarded so much that, so in the same way that advertising has become, people have now learned how to ignore advertising, essentially, right? I wonder whether the kids have learned how to ignore social media.
No, I don't know. I hope so.
I'm trying to.
It's largely a parental responsibility as well. But
well, no, but then again, we're probably getting a bit
digressing
in the weeds here. But no, but Australia's just banning
absolutely.
this. So yeah, but Australia.
Part of that stuff is why I think that there's change coming, right? All the stuff you hear from Jonathan Haidt as well. I mean, I knew all that as soon as I saw TikTok. I thought, God, it's going to destroy what's left of attention spans.
Oh yeah,
and it's the perfect spy and manipulation tool. And oh my God, right? Instagram was already bad, and then see the attention spans going further and further into fragmentation, and also impulse control. and ability to control your emotions. So that creates more fighting. So it's
this. I mean, like this. So I mean, like just to round this off. I mean, yeah, debate that with my kids. Not debate. Sorry.
Yeah.
Tell my kids all the time, like, just get off the screens, etc. So I had to, because I know what my own triggers are, my own sort of behavioral deficiencies are. My phone is in the living room at night. I had it by the bed the other day because my daughter had a friend over. So I was charging it in my room. And before I went to bed, I went onto Twitter and I scrolled for about 15 minutes. And I was like, hold on a second. This is precisely why I keep the phone in the other room. And it was very easy to get sucked back into that habit. And yes, I mean, I think, yes, there is a fair amount of parental kind of control that comes into this, but equally, it's really bloody hard.
Of course it's hard.
I mean, I honestly, I do not know how in the world today, in the affluent world today, and let's be clear that we are talking about the affluent world, or else, how it is possible to keep kids away from technology. And you know, they are using it in school. But, well, my daughter's school has now put in the pouches, where, so when they come in the morning, the phones have to go in the pouch. And they can only be unlocked by a teacher and only given back at the end. So they may unlock them during the day if they need them in class, but otherwise, you know, they get them home. So I think, it feels like people have realized or recognized how damaging some of it can be.
So the damages, I want to say, like, we talk a lot about self-esteem and health, but from my perspective, the incredible damage is cognitive.
Yeah. No one's able to have no one's able to hold a long thought in their head, or hold two contrarian opinions or positions and rationalize between the two.
Or learn. But you don't learn nearly as well from a screen. For some reason, you don't retain the information. Well, I think there's like,
it slows you down.
Scrolls endlessly, right? Whereas a book has a kind of architectural structuring where you can, kind of the same technique, you know, a mental map, something. There are all kinds of reasons why we don't learn as well on screens, and why it has a negative impact on, essentially, on our cognitive functioning. So I think a lot of schools, a lot of educators are realizing this, and it's going to change. It's got to change. It's got to change. I mean, we never would have expected that Australia would have taken these measures in the 16s. That's a good start. It's just, I know that's a very... I
wasn't that surprised that it was Australia, but I was surprised that they did it, right?
Exactly.
I mean, I think I'm just
Agreed.
Sorry, no, not at all. No, because I mean, I think about it again. So for me, my Kindle is the most amazing thing because I read so much. And I used to travel a lot, and my wife doesn't like the light on, so I read at night, and I read on Kindle with a black background. So I read a lot. However, I love reading paper books, but the only time I read a paper book is when I'm traveling somewhere where I'm not working, which is not most of the time. So, but I have noticed how much less I take in reading on the Kindle versus a paper book. But I also recently started, and I used to do a lot of this, but I started writing with a pen and paper again. And I journal every day, but I journal on my computer, on Notion or whatever. And what I write on an app is almost sort of like an agenda style. And then I did. It's like, you know, so at 7 I woke, and 10 I did this and whatever.
Fragmented.
Not fragmented, but it's more sort of reporting style, right? Whereas if I'm journaling, I go all over the place and think about things that I otherwise wouldn't be thinking about, and it happens just immediately when I'm writing with pen and paper versus typing. But listen, Christina, I've taken up far too much of your time. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. For our listeners, where can they find you online? Are you on LinkedIn, Twitter? Where can they find you on
LinkedIn? Would be the best place, with a K.
Okay. We will put links into the show notes. But for the meantime, thank you so much for joining me. Wishing you all the best for the festive season, and really loved having you on.
Thank you so much for having me. All the best.